Tonight we will be hearing from all of the candidates from all the parties except the Conservative Party, as Russell George declined to attend. But we will be hearing from the Liberal Democrats, the Labour Party, Gwlad, Reform UK and Plaid Cymru. So they will be joining us after the breakout rooms, and hopefully in a minute you'll get your invitations, and we'll spend about 20 minutes getting the questions together. The facilitator will write them down for you, so don't worry about that. And they will also ask the questions on your behalf.
So during the halftime, I introduced myself to the candidates, but we need to ask them to introduce themselves here. And I've asked them to keep their introductions to 1 minute. In reverse order alphabetically, Oliver, could you introduce yourself?
Gosh, thank you. My name is Oliver Lewis. I'm the Reform Party candidate for Montgomeryshire. The Reform Party is the successor party to the Brexit Party, which was founded in order to respect the democratic decision of the British people to leave the European Union. I myself was once a Remainer, and I converted to leave only shortly before the referendum. But I believe wholeheartedly that democratic referendum should be respected, and that's what took me into this organisation. The Reform Party's objective now is to move on to the next reforming stage of British institutions now here in the UK, including the devolved administrations, but also local government, reform of the House of Lords, notably its abolition and its replacement with an elected Senate, reforms to the civil service, the BBC licence fee, and lots of other aspects of British constitutional affairs. Thank you.
Great. Brilliant. Thank you, Oliver. Kate.
Hello, my name's Kate Eward and I'm the Labour Party candidate for the Senate elections for 2021. I also stood in the general election in 2019. I'm not a politician. I've never made any money out of politics in my life. Quite the reverse, probably. I'm a campaigner, I'm an organiser, and I'm a volunteer. And I fitted in a lot of work into life as well, and a lot of the other general stuff of life, like looking after parents, etc. So I've organised my workplace, my trade union, I've organised in campaigning groups, and that's, I suppose, the thing I enjoy most. Andy asked us when we were in the breakout room to say why we had stood in the election. And I think I'd have to still say the same as I did in 2019. I've got tired of yelling at the TV, and I've got tired of thinking that somebody else is going to go and do it for me. So, you know, if not you, and it really needs to be you, and it needs to be now. Let's just say it like that.
Thank you, Kate. I'll ask you to wrap up right there. That's all right. Thank you. Gwyn, she's in this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Internet problem. Gwyn Evans, born in Machynlleth and brought up in what was Cemmaes Road, but now Glantwmin. And I'm standing for Gwlad, and we're standing for the first time. Our descriptor says exactly what we are, which is the Welsh Independence Party. And we are standing for something radical and positive. We set our 3 columns of policies at gwlad.org, where we say the situation as it is now, what the Senedd can do, but it isn't doing, and it can do a lot, but the will isn't there, and what a glimpse of what an independent Wales could be. Probably finally, our policies come from anywhere and everywhere, different parties, different successful independent countries, but the one proviso we have is it right for Wales? The unionist parties are saying it's better together. If so, why isn't it? And I'm going to be asking you to vote for Gwlad, to vote for your country, and to vote for yourselves. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch I chi, Gwyn. Elwyn, chi'n barod.
Yeah, well, I'm Elwyn Vaughan. I live in Llanbramair. I'm a post-county councillor. That's a confession. But for most of the Dyfi Valley. But my background is in community development and community enterprise. And that has been my focus with helping communities get the village pub, village shop, etc. on the go. And politics for me is about much more than elections every 4 years. And that is crucial. I'm a background in campaigning, especially in housing rights, Welsh language matters, and environmental matters. Diolch yn fawr.
Great. Diolch Elwyn. Alison, there you are.
Hello, I'm Alison Alexander. I live with my family just outside Llanfachlin in the north of the constituency. I studied languages at university, became a local journalist, and then heard about the threat to a third of our flowering plants in the world by the end of this century and decided to retrain in botanical horticulture and plant conservation. And it sounds like I'm quite similar to Kate, really. I decided I either had to turn the radio off and stop shouting at it, or stand up and get involved myself. So I'm a town councillor now here in Llanfachlin, and I've helped set up a repair cafe. I'm part of a local environmental group, and I'm standing for the Welsh Liberal Democrats because I've always felt that the Liberal Democrats understand the climate emergency, and also I think our politics is in trouble, our democracy is in trouble. And I believe the Welsh Liberal Democrats stand for a fairer, more caring society. And that's what I'd like to see, greater empathy and people talking to each other. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to speak at these hustings. I think talking one-to-one is the start of rebuilding trust.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you. Diane, diolch fawr. So, sorry about the false start earlier. Pam, may I bring you in as group number one to ask a question?
Thank you. Okay, so I've actually, the person who actually came up with this has written it in the chat, and I'm going to just put it there now. How will the candidates ensure that there is no conflict between ecosystem resilience and biodiversity and food security here in Wales? Okay. Thank you.
No conflict between ecosystem resilience and biodiversity versus food security. So, Alison, as threatened, I'd like to come to you first, please.
Yes, well, I've been working on our land use policy together with a group of local farmers and ecologists, and I think it is entirely possible for us to work together to both guarantee food security and also to use land for reforestation and to repair our peat bogs, to sequester carbon as we need to, and also to increase biodiversity. Sustainable farming is very good for biodiversity. We've lost so many flower-rich meadows in the UK and Wales as well, 80%. That's habitat for insects and mammals, and that's food just gone for those creatures. We can afford to feed ourselves. We need more vegetable production in this country. We import 95% of our vegetables into Wales. We need to support horticulture. And yeah, I believe it's entirely possible. We just have to get on and work together to achieve it.
Thank you, Alison, for that. Elwyn, can I move on to you, please?
I likewise think it is possible, in actual fact. One of the problems we have at current is that there's a breakdown of trust between the Welsh Government and the farming organisations and farming unions, and that has to be rebuilt from day one. Because if we are to do these changes, you have to get the farming community on board. But one of the bigger things we have to do also is to increase substantially the amount of horticulture and crops grown in Wales. We've lost the tradition of the Pembrokeshire, the Llŷn, Anglesey growing crops. There's only 0.8% of the land in Wales growing crops at the moment. We need to increase that to at least 2% in the near future, and more after that, and that then enhances the biodiversity also in those communities. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch, Elwyn. Gwyn, felly.
Diolch yn fawr. I live on a farm. I'm farming, and I have been farming in the Tir Cymen, Tir Gofal, and now in Glastir. The farm hasn't had fertiliser for 30 years, artificial fertiliser that is, and we're organic. So I think I'm doing what you would like me to do, and I have to say that it works. It takes a lot more work, but possibly more money. But on the other hand, you're not buying all this fertilizer, etc. So there is a balance there that is a very interesting one to try and work out how to organize it. Organization is part of it. But the other part of it is that consumers also need to understand that if they want that quality, they are actually going to have to pay a bit more instead of the the Dutch auction in supermarkets of cheaper milk and bread, etc., there has to be a little bit more to pay. It isn't a massive amount, but it would help enormously. The second part is that there is this idea of we're going to export lamb, for instance. We love the quality of the lamb, but if we do that, we're going to be importing cheaper products just to keep the price down. With another hat I've got, I do organic cotton from China and from India and making garments.
Can I draw you to a close there, Gwen?
Yeah, people want cheap garments. You can't have it and the other side.
Okay, off Gwen. Kate, please.
So as people always used to say, if you can put a man on the moon, you can do anything. But what you have to have is you have to have an aim. You have to have a strategy. You have to all know where you're marching to, and you have to organise to get there. And there's some things that you do, and there's some things that we have to stop doing. Gwen's right to a great extent. We have to stop wanting such cheap food, cheaply produced food. And we also have to make sure that we're not continuing to pollute the land that we are on. I'm really concerned about things like the number of chicken farms which are in Montgomeryshire now. And I really think that we need to think about the whole aspect of how we're treating the land. It isn't just about what we do to improve the land. It's about what we stop doing that isn't helping our land. I'm really pleased that Welsh Labour has got in its manifesto the means to put some money in to empower communities as well, because this isn't just the reserve of farmers. We also need to all take some responsibility. So there's money in there for 2,000 sites for pollinators, in other words, meadows, tiny forests, including green spaces, more in our community, and also growing our own food locally and getting people more into doing that for themselves. And we should make sure in Montgomeryshire, if there's a Welsh Labour government on the 7th of May, that we take advantage of that fund within Montgomeryshire.
Thank you, Kate. Last but not least, Oliver. Please.
Thank you. Yeah, a superb question. I feel like I'm flashback to my geography A-level exam papers. So thank you. My first thought is obviously land use in Wales is unusual. We're not like England or other parts of the, well, if anything, we're closest to upland Scotland in terms of the division between arable and pastoral farming. I see it therefore as part of a much bigger requirement and necessity for an environmental sustainability strategy, which would look at coastal management, the management of forestry, the management of our wetlands, and also in terms of the relationship with natural resources Wales and the internal drainage boards in terms of flooding risk and so on our various major waterways. Obviously in Montgomeryshire, flooding on the Severn is a huge problem for us. I think therefore in terms of practical policy, we perhaps want to look at the farm subsidy programme, which I think at the moment is too aligned to England, to the requirements of English agriculture, which are so different to those of Welsh agriculture. Local authority farms, I think, have a big role to play. Montgomeryshire County, or Powys County Council is a big owner of land itself, so I'd like to see much greater local influence and integration there. In terms of food security, I think Powys exports too much raw foods, raw agricultural products, goes over the borders of England, and then it's transported back. I think we need to do more local manufacturing to reduce transportation costs and the effect that transportation has on the environment.
Okay, thank you, Oliver. So can I turn to group number 2, please, for your top question?
Okay. What are your burning environmental issues for our local community here in Mid Wales?
Right, very straightforward question. Priorities, please. So, Elwyn, newch chi fynd yn gyntaf tro yma, ysgwelwch yna.
Things in particular which I'm particularly interested in. One is the whole question about food, and if we are talking about diversity.
Sorry, Elwyn, roedd rhywbeth yn bod yn ystod yr eiliadau gyntaf. Newch chi ail
Iawn, okay. There are two things in particular I'd like to focus on. One of them is the food itself. If we are serious about diversifying the agricultural sector from the traditional red meat sector we have in Powys and Mid Wales, I want to see, as in other European regions, much more emphasis on other forms of food production, be it crops, be it horticulture, be it apples and fruit and vegetables also. But the other thing I have a big issue about is the whole question about trees. There's a lot of emphasis, and we'll come to it in the future, about planting trees, but I have a deep concern about the felling and clear felling of mature trees in this area at the moment, just for them to be burnt and converted into chips for fuel pellets. And I think that is total waste, very destructive, and undermines the efforts, the constructive efforts to plant more trees. I'll leave it there.
Okay, diolch Elwyn. Gwyn, felly.
Yes, I'd like to follow from what Elwyn was saying there. I was thinking about the trees as well, Elwyn, because there's this idea. I've personally planted in the schemes, I planted about 4,600 trees, and it hasn't interfered with the farming. But this idea of planting and taking out, the target would take out 2,000 farms throughout Wales. I'm not for it at all. If you think about the area from Aberangeth to Aberllefenni, where I remember them coming in the 50s and planting the trees there, that land has gone forever. I don't know of a single field which has come back into food production. Once you planted trees on it, it's gone. I don't like that. I'm not keen on it. There are plenty of other opportunities. The other thing is that from Wales's point of view, we're more concerned about what the climate effect it is that's on Wales, as opposed to Wales has on the climate, because on the whole, we're behaving quite well. And my final point is that COVID has been a fantastic experiment to show us that when the cars and everything were off the roads, the pollution level went down dramatically, but the sheep and the cows were still burping and farting. They get the blame. They're not.
Diolch, Gwyn. So, Kate, can I bring you in, please? Kate, you're muted still. Could you start again, please, when you've...
Sorry, I have a bit of a delay up here. So I'll give you two issues. The first one is, again, intensive farming, but the second one is water. So intensive farming, we have 10 million chickens now in Powys. And the planning committee of the county council has okayed 167 applications. It's probably more than that now. I actually think it's getting nearer 200 applications for chicken farms, intensive poultry units, the biggest of which is 330,000 birds. And this is having a massive stress, I think, on the land around here. It's having a massive stress in the rivers, things like that, but equally there's so much, there's no better word for it, there's so much chicken shit coming out of there that you can get a tractor and trailer to spray your land for £15. That's not even covering the person's wages, it's not covering the fuel to get there, it's just an absolute overabundance. And we really seriously need to look at this in a holistic way and look at the stress we're having on the whole ecosystem. The other one is water, and I'll say very quickly, we discussed this actually in the breakout room at the beginning. The land up here, I live up at Kevin Cove, and the land up here has wells that have run for 200 years that are running dry now. We seriously have to look at, if Elwyn is right and we're going to move on to other crops, I am not convinced we have the water management for that.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Oliver, please.
I mean, I concur with all of Kate's comments around intensive farming. I don't think that's a problem restricted to Wales. I think it's a broader UK and European problem. And I don't think, I'm afraid, the Common Agricultural Policy has done much to help us with that. I think that feeds into animal welfare, which again is another sort of bucket of policies, but it's absolutely one that should be reviewed. My two immediate priorities would probably be the dominance of coniferous forestry in Powys, obviously dating back from World War I, when the National Forestry Commission sort of planted coniferous forestry everywhere rather than deciduous species. Obviously, native deciduous species have much greater biodiversity than coniferous forestry. I think that could be a long-term programme. Well, that work is already underway, but I think it could be accelerated and better funded. Obviously, the more trees, the more afforestation we have, the less impact or the more rainfall will be absorbed by the hills of Paris, and thereby would alleviate the flooding problems of the Severn. This is not yet reformed by policy, but I'm absolutely committed to the creation of the Cambrian Mountains National Park to follow through the recommendations of the original national parks, number of national parks that were envisaged for the UK back in the 1940s. I also think our side of the Shropshire Hills, of the same geological strata, should have some form of a national park or AONB protection as well. So on this side of the Powys border, because obviously there are some very fragile ecosystems contained in those areas.
Thank you, Oliver. Alison, then, please.
My approach to the question has been rather different to the others. When I think environmental issues, I immediately thought of carbon emissions, and the major sources of carbon emissions in Powys are transport and heating our homes. Particularly home heating doesn't receive much attention at all. And so my approach would be to put in electric car charging infrastructure, and indeed I'm fully behind our hydrogen car manufacturer in Llandrindod, Welsh, who hope to have an affordable car on the road by 2025. There's an opportunity to look at integrated public transport, which will please Oliver to hear me saying this again after last night, but by which I mean looking at things like Planning Car Club are doing, shared electric cars. We could have electric minibuses tootling around the place that work for community transport and for school transport. For home heating, I can't believe that I'm still seeing new homes being built and seeing a gas tank or an oil tank in the garden. We should be having carbon neutral homes being built. We need to change in planning law. And our electricity needs are projected to double by 2050. We need to upgrade the grid infrastructure to allow for that to happen, as well as, of course, invest heavily in renewable energy production. So that was the carbon emission side of it. Looking at that from a natural resources angle, then I would say, you know, the biggest type of habitat for carbon sequestration is peat bogs. So we absolutely need those restored. And then the second type of soil that sequesters carbon most is woodland. So yes, we need to plant that. And I agree with what others have said. It needs to be in the right place. Obviously, we hear about woodland being planted on peat bog or quality meadow. That's very unhelpful.
Okay, can I stop you there, Alison? Save the rest of it for another question. I'm sure there'll be opportunities maybe now, because we've dealt with that question. Thank you very much. Can I turn to group 3, please?
Oh yeah, so our question, our number 1 question, has raised its head already, but not specifically with all the candidates. So we wanted to ask what the candidates what the candidates intend to do to encourage changes in intensive farming practices, so that they're less negatively impactful on the environment. Especially in the light of the increase in planning applications which have been approved in the last few years.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. So, yes, many of the candidates have referred to this, but please expand or treat that question as you wish. Changes to intensive farming, Gwyn.
So the applications are allowed. It is up to the planning department to turn them down. So the power is in your hands already. Elwyn, I think, is on the planning committee. I'm sure he could shine some light on why they approve of 200 odd, if Kate is right, and I'm sure she is, of these chicken farms. I would like to address something else, and it's the trees bit again, because I've been involved in the debate and I'm sort of in the middle of it a little bit. If you put all these trees in certain areas, and as Alison quite rightly said, on good soil, on productive soil, you then have less soil, and the Labour Party have said they want to keep the same production level from the country. If you then have less good fields, you then have to go intensively on what's left. It is the complete opposite of what you want. So the joined up thinking is not there. There is a kowtowing to the environmental lobby, but actually through the back door, it is going against what the environmental lobby wants. It is, and it needs to be pointed out to them, otherwise they're going to pass law which is going to give the opposite effect of what the environmental lobby wants, and actually what agriculture wants as well. We're on the same page on this one. It's just we are coming at it from a different angle.
Okay, thank you, Gwen. Kate, you're on next.
Okay, thanks. So I'll try not to talk too much about chickens, but I would have to say that certainly on the chicken farms, we want a moratorium on chicken farms. When I say we, this is Montgomeryshire Labour. We have sought to get to that for Welsh Labour, and we will continue to do that because we want to make sure that there is a full impact evaluation of what all those farms are having, the impact they're having on our environment. And remember, we've got 5 times more farms, chicken farms, intensive poultry units, which have been approved in Powys than in the rest of Wales combined. You know, we are Chickenopolis. So I'll also throw in a very unpopular one from the farmers' meeting the other night, which is NVZs. You know, we need to make sure that we do not continue to pollute our rivers. Our rivers are in a terrible state as it is, and we need to make sure that effluent from farms is not hitting the watercourses. And Gwyn, I know you said the other night that there are far more incursions into the rivers from sewage than from farming. However, that is more diluted. I would absolutely punitively damage those who are doing it. They have a far lower impact than effluent from farms. All you have to look at is Natural Resources Wales, Gwyn.
Okay, thank you, Kate.
The final point I'd make is just that we will make sure that funding for farming is based on positive outcomes for the environment as we move forward.
Okay, thanks, Kate. Oliver, then, please.
Yeah, just very quickly. I mean, the economic problem we face is that there is a huge decline, and there has been a huge decline in demand for lamb in the UK since the 1960s. And there's been a huge increase in demand for chicken. So the increase in the number of chicken units is in some ways economically rational. You know, it's our farms deciding to respond to changes in consumer demand. And I think there are 2 ways we can tackle this, because I don't deny there is an issue with too much use of intensive chicken sheds, which, as I say, links into the animal welfare piece. But I think there could be a state-sponsored buying out of upland areas, so where there is intensive pastoral farming with sheep on the upland areas, and those compulsory purchased upland areas could then be afforested, which would then address the issue with lack of biodiversity in our forestry. And I think there could be some consideration given to a statutory restriction on the number of chicken farms per council ward. That might be 1 or 2 per ward, I don't know. But there's no doubt about it. We are being, Powys is being covered in these intensive intensive chicken rearing units, and it's getting clearly pretty out of control. That said, I think we all need to bear in mind that we do require cheap food. It's quite extraordinary to hear the Labour candidate saying food's too cheap. Britain's rural areas are some of the poorest in Europe.
I should have to draw you to a close there, Oliver.
We must remember that not all of us can afford to eat organic corn-fed chicken.
Thank you. You've made that point. Okay. Alison, please.
Our agriculture policy is to support sustainable farming, and I think the key message that I'd like to get across is that I have a great deal of sympathy for farmers. I feel that farmers have changed their farming practices in order to comply with the framework that government after government has set out in policy terms and in subsidy schemes. That's why farming changed and intensified. And there are plenty of farmers like Gwyn who are already farming organically and in tune with the land. I don't see a split between conservationists and farmers. I really think that's a really damaging debate or approach. Anyway, so I think the thing is to support mixed farming, restoration of hedges, and encouraging things like silvopasture. You know, this is going on. Regenerative agriculture, where people are using farms, trees as shelter for their animals, for example. Flower strips in farms. There's so much that we can support through the subsidy scheme, but also it is a problem of our society more widely. This that we've talked about food affordability. You know, if we have more affordable homes for people, but it means they're not struggling just to keep a roof over their heads. They have more money to pay for food and good quality food. We also need to protect our farmers with our policy regarding imports. We can't be allowing poor quality imports to outcompete farmers in the UK. You know, not supporting. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Alison. Plenty of points you squeezed in there. Elwyn, felly,
thank you. Right, I want to correct a couple of issues first of all. Yes, I'm a member of the planning committee. You know, we have not had 200 applications to planning committee. Planning officers in Powys have dealt with applications to that fact, and that's the crucial difference there. There are a number of things with the situation of the chicken sheds in Powys. One of the big issues I have is that the feed comes in form of soya and the effect that has on the Amazon basin. And so that's one side. We need to push Peirian Research Centre tiled protein crops that could be utilised and grown in mid Wales in this climate instead of importing feed for these intensive units. The other challenge there is the waste and manure at the other end, the effect that has on SSSIs, on lichens, etc. We need more biogas facilities in Powys to minimise that negative effect on landscape. But also we need to review NRW. The biggest problem planning has is the guidance from NRW to when those applications come before. If they give the green light to them, there isn't hardly anything as an authority in the current rules that can oppose it. And what will happen, the applicant will go to appeal and they will always more or less win that appeal and award costs against the local authority. So NRW needs to be beefed up tremendously, given powers, and really it needs to be reformed as an organisation, but perhaps it's another discussion.
Yeah, so Group 4 has jumped the gun, and if anybody's reading the chat, you will have had due warning of that, but let's read it out as well. Who would like to read out number 4? Somebody from Group 4 like to read out your question?
Yeah, I'll read that out. I think Alison's already begun to address this. In Group 4, it's quite frustrating because we really pulled out some of the major issues facing not only Wales, but our planet. So our question is, the United Kingdom government has announced a 78% reduction in carbon for 2035. Can this be achieved without carbon trading and offset, for instance, by trading our carbon budget with China? What do the candidates think practically and crucially about that, please?
Okay, very up-to-date question there from that group. Thank you. Kate, could you kick off, please?
I think the answer is I don't know with that. You're asking me a question about UK government who haven't met their targets so far and have now increased them. Now, I'm all for ambition, but you do have to have a plan behind it as well. And you look at the language that gets used by UK government around this, and I am paraphrasing, but you get a very firm impression that they think technology is going to come in and save us. And I absolutely know that there's a place for technology, there's hydrogen, etc. We have to invest in new technologies. But it almost says, I don't really have to change my life. I don't have to stop flying less or anything like that, because technology will come and save me. There was a discussion on the radio this morning about how we should allow the free market and capitalism to sort this problem out. Where we seem to have got in this position in the first place because of massive exploitation of the world's resources and the concentration of that money in the hands of the few. So I am unconvinced that the markets have a way of doing this, but we do have to. You know, it's easy to be cynical, but if there is a stretch and target, and I absolutely want to see that, then we have to sit down and we have to figure out how we do it. But I don't believe that governments necessarily have the answer. Governments have to enable, set a framework, put the money behind it. But at the end of the day, I actually think it's down to us, to our communities, and here in Wales to deliver.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Oliver. Oliver, you're muted still.
Sorry, I was muted. I actually agree wholeheartedly with Kate, and I think changing consumer habits will mean that actually given an injection of energy as a result of COVID, as I think, obviously, given we've been so stationary for so long, there is a feeling, you know, we were all travelling too much before. We were jumping on planes far too often, driving perhaps when we could have taken alternative sources of transport. I didn't add in my introduction, I'm also a rail campaigner and campaign for renationalisation and expansion of our rail network. And I think in Wales, there are a huge number of underutilised railway lines that could be put to much better use, much more intensive use. I think of our main road between Shrewsbury to Newtown and our underinvested in Cambrian line. There's lots that can be done, but I think it will be consumer-led, and I think consumers are demanding it. And yeah, hopefully we'll be on course to meet that reduction.
Okay, thank you, Oliver. Alison, can I turn to you, please?
Well, again, I'll have to confess that I couldn't answer the question precisely. I do think we need to take responsibility for our own carbon emissions. I worry about it just trading away our responsibility, as others have said as well. There is so much we could do. For example, I've talked about transport and homes being major emitters, but also industry. Now, when it comes to using hydrogen, for example, industry is a perfect place to do it. You usually have industrial zones with big roof expanses for solar panels, and that energy can be used to hydrolyze the hydrogen. There's huge emission savings that we can make through that. So, and I think also we have to recognise that in the richer parts of the world, you know, we are responsible for the lion's share of the emissions. We need to find a way of reducing our emissions ourselves rather than exporting our responsibilities elsewhere.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Alison. Elwyn, felly? Dwi methu clywed chi, Elwyn?
Good one?
Yep.
Actually, I was in a meeting this week about carbon trading, and I must confess I have a great deal of skepticism and doubt about it, because for me, it gives multinational corporations and international capitalism, if you like, an excuse not to do anything. That is my fear about it. The discussion was specifically about Plynlimon, actually, and whether Heathrow Airport could pay carbon initiative, carbon levy, if you like, and allocate that towards Plynlimon. The question is then, okay, that's fine financially, perhaps to those benefiting from that, but it does nothing in terms of changing the culture and changing of and minimizing the effects of what is already happening in Heathrow. That's just one example. I think I have fears and skepticism about carbon trading as a whole, and that it is a sop, really, and doesn't go to the root causes and problems that we face before us.
Diolch, Elwyn. Gwynter.
Yeah, following on from Elwyn there, because we've been in some of the meetings regarding the rewilding on Plymlimon. And it's a company called Artemis that was in the city, that they were taking on the carbon footprint and the carbon trading. And they actually say, we invest anywhere in the world to make a profit. And the profit is made by them on the back of the farmers. They'll give them a few pence, that's for sure. But actually the work being done by the farm should be down to the farm and down to Mid Wales, not to Artemis, who then is using aeroplanes all over the place, and this cancels it out. I don't like the scheme, it stinks. That's the first part. Secondly, COVID has actually shown us a little bit of the way, and me personally, during this period, I would have done at least 8 flights, because I'm into the garment industry worldwide, and I haven't been anywhere, and I've been able to do it by Zoom. First of all, I've saved an absolute packet in money, and secondly, I haven't left home. So there is a way, there is an opportunity, there is a possibility. Is the will there? I don't know. The one thing I would say, please, let's not go back to what it was. Here's a chance to do something new and something exciting.
Okay.
And by the way, Kate, there is no free market.
Okay, well,
follow the money.
That's for another time. So thank you, Group 4. Group 5, who have we got?
Hello. What we got in Group 5, similar topic to the other questions. Considering the overwhelming urgency of the climate and ecological crisis, how would you integrate addressing said crisis as the priority across all Welsh departments?
Okay, that's a question for those who wish to be in government, which I take it to be all candidates. So, Kate, could you start with that one, please?
Well, the old saying is always that you get what you measure. So if you make that measurement their set of green targets, then I think you start to solve some of the problem. You've got to make sure you've got the right targets though as well, because you can end up encouraging the wrong behaviours. So when you think of a target, you also have to examine the behaviours that will happen because of it, that will be stacked behind it. And you have to make sure that you're going in the right direction, be prepared to review, be prepared to be wrong, fail and change. But I believe that it's a great question, is this, because I think it should be at the heart of how we organise, no question about it. Have I got a few more seconds?
You have, if you want.
Oh, jolly good.
Don't feel
I
obliged.
thought you were moving to hit your glass then.
No.
So I do think it's about targets, but I also think that some of that should be set by communities, that there should be reference to the people in this. You can't just be asked every 5 years to elect somebody and then get a say in 5 years' time. There needs to be not just the normal path of people coming back, you know, and meeting their constituents, but there needs to be a more active or citizens' assembly sort of approach to how we have our voice heard collectively and how we comment on this. I was only thinking today that years and years ago, we used to sit there eagerly every month and wait for the balance of payments to be announced on TV. And I don't know for the life of me why it mattered to us, but I do think that every day we should look at the amount of carbon in the atmosphere and put that on the BBC, and that might change their news as well.
Thank you, Kate. Okay. So, Oliver, could you pick this one up, cross-government, please? Oliver, you're still muted there.
Okay. I'm actually going to be controversial. I'm going to say it's not the most urgent problem facing Wales or the UK at this moment in time. I think the most urgent crisis facing Wales is the living standards crisis. The disparity in GDP per capita between Wales and other parts of the UK is remarkable and disturbing. A friend of mine who's a professor of public policy at the University of Cambridge recently done some calculations on this, and her calculations show that vast swathes of the UK in terms of GDP per person, wealth per person, income per person, makes us poorer than a lot of East Germany. And I think we need to work very hard to ensure that our economy is vibrant here in Wales, because when we have a more vibrant economy, as in Germany, as in Switzerland, as in France, we can invest the proceeds of that in making our economy more environmentally sustainable. To answer the question in terms of government departments, obviously the question leads, I think, quite directly to the installation quality of government buildings down in Cardiff, and also, of course, NHS hospitals and state schools, many of which are appallingly built in appalling condition, and we ought to be reinvesting the proceeds of wealth in those buildings to ensure they're better insulated.
Okay, thank you, Oliver. Alison.
Yes, excellent question. Focuses the mind. I disagree. I think this is our most urgent crisis facing, well, humanity. But I don't think that means one should forget about all other areas of activity. The reason I'm a Liberal Democrat is that we've always understood the climate emergency, but at the same time focus on education and equal opportunities and all of that. So yes, absolutely embed this right the way across all departments. You know, we can measure the emissions impact of anything we do, can't we? When we think about what the Welsh Government has responsibility for, the NHS, education, agricultural policy. I mean, we're talking about buildings there, largely with the NHS and schools, that they can be insulated and generate their own electricity and everything else. It's entirely possible to measure the impact of government decisions in terms of carbon emissions. It's an excellent thought, definitely to be encouraged.
Okay, thank you, Alison. Elwyn.
Just a couple of points. It's a problem within civil service, without a doubt, of a silo mentality, and we see that very, very often. You only have to look at an example in the Dyfi Valley. I mentioned NRW a minute ago. A village in the Dyfi Valley is site owned by NRW. One part of the NRW wanted to build houses in it to maximize profit. The other part wanted to work with the community for community benefit and social use, etc. So if one organization which is supposed to be leading on environmental stuff can't agree in-house, it poses immense challenges for the wider structure of government. What strikes me, of course, we do have a Future Generations Act in Wales. It's not strong enough, it's not clear enough, it's not it's fine in theory, but practice is weak, and that should form a basis basically for future action, and should be beefed up and clarified as a framework to measure activity right across the board between departments, and hopefully that then would get that positive way forward instead of the present system of what we have.
Yeah. Gwyn.
Yes. If you take it on a world scale, first of all, and then bring it down, we're burning the Amazon, and yet we're trying to put trees up on Plymlimon at the same time. It doesn't make sense. Not one instead of the other. It's not joined up thinking. The same thing goes to the Senedd. The departments are so jealous of their own departments, they're not talking to each other. On the county council level, we've seen it. It used to be lots of spending by the transport department or the roads department on the 1st, 2nd, 3rd or 4th of April before the year ends, etc. So you get signs going up that we don't need. They can't get this thinking of, we've got spare cash, we didn't need to spend it here, it's needed over there, we'll hand it over, and they should be rewarded for it. They're so jealous of losing their budget for next year. It's wrong thinking. That, to me, would be the change across governments in general, world and local, all the way down. It's the new, and as for the NRW, it should have been strangled at birth. Take it outside, shoot it now, and put it out of its misery. It's a joke. It's unbelievable, inefficient. it is, most of the things that it does is complete rubbish. I could do a whole hour on it. It's
Alas,
terrible.
we don't have the whole hour to enjoy there, Gwyn, but thank you for that contribution. So that takes us to the 5th time round, and I'm looking now for group 6, please.
Yeah, that's mine. I feel our first question has been mostly addressed. I'm going to move to our backup, and it's a bit of a change of pace. So what we want to know is, how can you ensure care staff are not in a constant race to the bottom, and how can we ensure they are treated with dignity and given a proper livable wage? And also, do you believe care services should be brought under public ownership to ensure better care for patients and better treatment for carers?
Okay, thank you, Ian. Oliver, can I come to you first this time, please?
Yes, I absolutely do think care services ought to be under public control. I also think much greater interaction could take place between the hospice sector and our NHS hospitals. I think the hospice sector is the sort of forgotten army in the third sector of end-of-life care and of long-term treatment of those with, in the case of the hospice sector, terminal illness. But I would aim for a much greater emphasis on co-location, so that where we have a large hospital site, there could be care facilities in landscape grounds attached to them, sharing the same heating facilities, so you're not having replica boilers and all of the issues there around higher carbon emissions and so on, and also potentially a hospice of some form not far away, so then those patients would have access to healthcare from medics as well. I'm a great believer in the potential of public provision of those sorts of services, and it's something that I'm afraid the existing establishment parties have done a great deal to denigrate and destroy since the 1980s.
All right, thank you, Oliver. Very clear. Alison, could you come in on that one, please, then?
Yes, so reform to the care sector, it takes up quite a large chunk of our manifesto this year. We would like to integrate care with NHS provision, working towards a national care service. And we talk about parity of wages between the NHS staff and care staff. I was talking with a lady just recently who, after 35 years work, is still only earning the minimum wage for the care work she does. And she joked about having to use her Zimmer frame to take herself to work in years to come. So it is a dreadful situation. The lack of esteem for carers, we would like to combat, and certainly to make sure that absolutely all have, at the very minimum, the real living wage. We have an ageing population, and this really is a crisis that we need to deal with. And as for public ownership, I don't have an opinion on that one, but I do know that our county council, our town councillor, Carol Robinson in Welshpool, has been involved in the care sector for most of her working life, and she remembers very fondly when the care sector was public and how much more effective it was. We would advocate much more community involvement in local decision making generally, in how services are run. We talk about a community act to empower communities, so people have the answers themselves for local services.
All right, good. Thank you, Alison. Elwyn, felly?
Well, if there's anything we should have learned over the last 12 months, after this.
Elwyn, chi'n dawel iawn eto. Iawn.
Okay. If there's anything we should have learned over the last 12 months, after this very long 12 months, is that the care sector and care workers, as other frontline workers, have been essential to carrying things forward and have paid a heavy burden and need to be respected much more. And therefore, obviously, I would want to see their terms and conditions enhanced. As a party, we want to see the care sector and NHS integrated as one within Wales. I see it often within Powys Council, the nonsense of a competition between the Powys Health Board and Powys County Council about who pays for care for a person coming out, let's say from Shrewsbury Hospital or others. And all that effort goes into negative aspects rather than to the positive aspects of actually delivery of care. And our priorities as a society, to me, strikes as being totally back to front and wrong. And therefore we should show the due support and respect. And yes, they should be within a public-owned service also.
Gwynda?
Okay, yes, I was unmuting.
Okay.
Can I give you a couple of examples of things that I've had to go through in the last 5 years? My father had dementia, and we went to Powys, and there was a lady there, I will name her, Jackie Rees. Phenomenal. Double her pay immediately, please. She said one thing to us, which was, you will never need to speak to anybody else but me. She took over everything in our difficult time, and she got my father into Having a Wine, a purpose-built building with unbelievable people working there. It was how the service should be run. And I know other places where there are old houses that are being converted and they're not very good, local to me, and I wouldn't want my father to be there. So it is possible. My mother-in-law in Austria, she was in a care home, and they've had a brilliant idea. The care home is semi-detached to a hospital. So when any of them are ill, you just open the in-between door and they're in the hospital. There's no ambulance or anything. They're there in 3 minutes. And it is such an easy thing. It is such a phenomenal service. It's just, again, it's thought. It's not extra cost. There's a building there, there's a building there, stick it together, and it really works brilliantly. Finally, I would say it is a disgrace, the payment and the 1% that's been offered to nurses and the massive amount that's been spent on nuclear missiles. It's a joke. It's outrageous.
I'll have to stop you there. You made that point. Thank you, Gwen. Kate Dearden then, please. We're rounding up here.
I'm with Gwyn on the nurses and nuclear missiles one, but I'm going to come back to the question. So the question was about how do we ensure staff are not in a race to the bottom. So it's particularly about the workers, I think, in the care industry. The only way you can do this to any great extent is to take those contracts back into the public sector. Welsh Labour's programme is to take the contracts for looked after children back first, and then in our policy document, it's to take the contracts for domiciliary care back into the public sector. Domiciliary workers are treated appallingly. Now, I've personally looked at documentation for people who have 8-hour contracts, an 8-hour day within Montgomeryshire, and they have that broken up into 2 4-hour sessions with 1 minute between so that they don't get a break. There is absolute exploitation in that sector. You have to take the hours they offer. You have to keep taking them. If you don't take them, then a lot of people are on 0 hours contracts. They won't get the money to live. And these are contracts that are put out by Powys Council. I think that I don't know. I don't know if they really look at or really take evidence from the people who actually are at the end of those contracts, and they really need to. The other couple of things I'd just say is we really need to do this because actually our care is fractured within Montgomeryshire, within Powys. I was talking to a woman today in Welshpool who actually contracts for care for individuals on behalf of individuals. And she said, well, she told me a number of stories, but one of them was that she had to have somebody that she helps actually die in a hospice who wanted to die at home, because in a deeply rural community, it's very hard to get care companies to put somebody into a deeply rural area because of the travel, because of the amount of time it takes to get there. We need to address that.
Yeah, thank you very much. So that's group 6. Thank you very much. Group 7, we have 2 groups left. I hope everybody's still awake. You seem to be doing very well, especially the candidates. Diane. Group 7, question, please.
Group 7. Well, you've kind of half had quite a lot of our first two questions, so I'm going to ask our separate question. It's completely different. How do the candidates, do the candidates support the police, crime, sentencing and courts bill? And can the candidates explain their stance?
Okay.
I think that's the right.
Change of pace on that one. Alison, you're first up for that one, if I may.
The part of that bill that I've focused on most has been the notion of restricting people's right to peaceful protest, for it to be for their protest to be contained because it might annoy others, I think is terribly loose language. And yeah, I just see this as a way of containing people's right to make their voices heard in a peaceful way. That's my biggest contention about that bill. I think it is completely wrong.
Okay, thank you, Alison. Elwyn?
Yeah. Well, yes, I am totally opposed to the bill. It's fair to say I've been on numerous protests and marches, and yes, we had the courtesy of visiting North Wales police cells as part of those on more than one occasion for what I thought were the right things to do on those campaigns. So I dare say I would be, like many others, have had very long holidays or deep fine, to say the least, if that bill had been in existence. I am totally opposed to it. As I said initially, my politics is community politics, is campaign politics, and as part of democracy, those are fundamental to me. The most progressive and best things that we have had in these aisles in the last 100 years have come about not because of Westminster and some fat old men sitting on green benches there. It's because communities and real radical people have fought and fought and fought for our fundamental rights. And it's imperative that we all, or whatever political persuasion we are, ensure that those rights continue for the future.
Gwyn. Gwyn.
I've very little to add to what has already been said. I'm in total agreement with both speakers. But there is one thing that I would ask you to keep your eyes on, and it's not in the bill, but I imagine it's going to come in some shape or form, is the vaccine passports. And it's a sort of an ID card through the back door. It ties in with that, and if you're demonstrating, etc., where's your passport, where's your... I can see it coming. I don't like it.
Okay, thank you, Gwyn. Kate?
So it's a shame Russell George isn't here. You might have a more balanced response. I, again, am against the bill. I would definitely like it killed. The rights that we have, the rights that we enjoy in our lives, we haven't had given to us. Other people have fought for them. Generations after generations have fought for those things. And people have died to give us those rights. And we have, you know, if we've got a responsibility, it's to actually cherish those and enhance them for those who come after. This bill will not do that. It feels, and I'm sorry for anybody who's younger than me here, but it really feels like the 1980s again. The days that you had to go and see the police before you could have any sort of demonstration, and you get shoved about and abused and God knows what. You know, we're back and begging to be heard again, and we cannot be in that position. We need to be on the streets and arguing against this. And it's about the way the police will treat us in this as well. You have to contrast how they behaved at the demonstration for Sarah Everard against the way that they have behaved in demonstrations recently with Chelsea Football Club and the Super League. It's materially different. And we will be treated materially differently if we keep arguing for our rights. We kill it now because the next step will be even worse.
Great, thank you, Kate. And Oliver, could you round up this question, please?
I do oppose the bill, but for different reasons that have been mentioned. I am of the opinion that policing should be devolved to Wales, so that the Welsh government should have broadly the same powers as the Scottish government. And as such, obviously, being an English bill, it would only apply to England. And I think Wales perhaps could consider legislation that's more appropriate for policing on our side of the border. That said, I do think the rule of law is as precious a British value and a Welsh value and an English value and a Scottish value. And I don't think destruction of property, the like of which was seen yesterday in Canary Wharf, does the cause any favour. I think it will alienate moderate people who make up most people in the society, the non-politicised people that make the decisions at the ballot box which determine political outcomes. As such, and this is the other reason why I opposed the bill, our electoral system is so archaic, first past the post. And I think if Extinction Rebellion and the environmental movement wish to achieve the vision they wish, then they've got to do that democratically. And that's very difficult to do in our backward and archaic electoral system.
Okay, in that case, I'd like to thank all the candidates for their answers to the questions and offer each of them in turn up to 2 minutes to make a closing statement of your choice, obviously relevant to tonight. And I think we're on to Elwyn to start. And you've noticed in the chat, you're missing the first 4 or 5 words you might like to repeat. It needs warming up, obviously, your microphone.
Well, it's joys of technology in mid-Wales, isn't it? I won't keep you long. As I mentioned, my background is community politics and community campaigning. And in my role in Powys Council, what I've tried to do is push the boundaries of the independent, conservative-controlled council to think further ahead for the sake of our communities. That is why I presented and got them to support the initial climate change motion. That is why we've campaigned with some members on Talk Tonight, and I must say with my Green Party friend on the council, against plastics and single-use plastics in Powys. And that's why we managed to get the Powys to also accept the motion to minimise single-use plastics within their system, and also got them to voice opposition to nuclear dump in Powys. And that is why I've been very vocal in attacking our Conservative MP for Montgomeryshire, particularly in relation to the Agri Bill and the fact that that could well allow the lowering of standards as part of trade deals with America, etc. As part, looking forward for this election, our applied commitment in particular, I'll summarise, is by 2035 to have net zero emissions, 100% electricity from renewables by 2035, and to have a Nature Act to reflect the immense concern, not only about climate change, but the loss of biodiversity in Wales, which I think very often we tend to forget, and to restore biodiversity by 2050. And also, somebody touched earlier about the concept of national park for mid-Wales. Personally, I much prefer the concept they have in France of Parc Natural, which not only looks at the land and land use, etc., but also how we add value, integrate communities, and make the most of the resources within those. I'll leave it there.
Okay, diolch yn fawr, Elwyn. Gwyn Evans.
Diolch yn fawr. Thank you for the invitation this evening. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I've learned a few things at the same time. I would ask you that you take some time, please, and look at Gwlad's manifesto for this election. I'm aware there's an election coming up, and it's gwlad.org. And we've laid out everything very clearly. No big words, no government speak, fairly plain, straight, and honest. That is the feedback that we're getting. We believe, of course, that an independent Wales could do the job far better than the current system, which is dependent on Cardiff and London. The situation is currently we've got the Governor General in Cardiff, who is going to Simon Hart, who is actually employing people now to hand out funds. And please keep your eyes open. He is going to be bypassing the Senedd, and he is going to be building the M4 bypass with money direct from London. This is going way above and beyond. It's dangerous. If you still want to vote for your normal party, we understand that. But I would ask you to give us your second vote. It's another chance for an independent Wales. Many Labour voters, 51% are for independence. Many Lib Dems are, we know that, but they can't vote for Plaid Cymru necessarily because of history and whatever, and some of the policies. This is an opportunity so that you can go for another route. The future is bright for Wales, but not under a blue government in London and not under a red Senedd in Cardiff. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch, Ben. Kate, could you follow on that, please?
Okay, so first of all, thank you to the organisers of this meeting. It has been really interesting. The only other hustings we've done, all we could do was see each other as candidates. We weren't able to see anybody else. So it's nice to see an audience as well. We all missed people this last year. We're not short of issues to address, are we? Let's be honest. And we've had some great questions tonight. And thank you for everyone who came early, discussed those and put them to us. I'm not going to recite the manifesto to you. You'll be relieved to know. You can look on my Facebook page, which is Kate for Montgomeryshire, and you'll find most things on there. If you don't, it'll come up in the next few days. I just want to pay tribute really to the ethos of this meeting and just come back to the climate emergency. The most depressing day of last year for me, and it was a pretty depressing year for all of us, was actually at the Hay Book Festival. And it was Mark Linus's book, which went through the 6 degrees of global warming. And, you know, each degree that you went through, we're heading for 4 degrees at the moment, we are heading for catastrophic climate change. And even when we passed the 1 degree, it barely got a couple of days on the news in 2015. This has to be central to our thinking. Everything else is peripheral if we do not solve this seriously wicked problem.
Thank you, Kate. I have to close you there. That's thank you for that. Oliver.
Thank you. Obviously, it goes with the name, Reform. It's my view and the Reform Party's view that the car crash of respecting the 2016 referendum was demonstrated by issues in respecting that referendum amongst all three the major established parties, the Conservatives, Labour and the Lib Dems, showed just what a challenge the British electorate has in terms of getting institutions that reflect and respond to public opinion in a way that is democratic, which allegedly is what this country is built on, and a value. We're always told we have these values of democracy and localism, but what we tend to see is centralisation. So politicians of all of the three major parties say we want local people to control local services, and all we see is further and further centralisation and denudation of local authority powers and local authority control over public services. Academisation, which hasn't afflicted Welsh schools, but has very much afflicted state schools in England, is a great example of that. I'm afraid, Kate, a lot of these issues go back to New Labour's continuation of Thatcherite ideas of privatisation and outsourcing. I'm very glad that she has said some of those should be reversed, but the problem began under 13 years of a Labour government. My solution to that locally, I think we need our own county council. I think power should be broken up into two councils. We have Brecon Radnor as a unitary authority, and Montgomeryshire as its own unitary authority as well. And I think if we can have our own county hall back in Welshpool, that will mean that local politicians are within full view of the electorate. Because I think if decisions are made out of view, we tend to get bad decisions being made. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. Alison, you had the first bite at the very first group question, and you're the final contributor this evening, please.
Thank you, and thanks for organising this evening. I remember back in the 90s sitting in geography class learning about global warming, and I'm feeling very puzzled that the grown-ups weren't doing anything about it. And then I carried on my education, the years went by, and there were all these global agreements. Finally, something was going to be done. Countries are going to sign up to solve the problem. And then here we are. And it's a dreadfully depressing, worrying time. And I didn't feel I could sit back and do nothing about it. I'm a practical person. I like to get stuck in. I've done that locally, as I said, setting up the Repair Cafe in Llanfachlin. But we need to do more. As XR says, we need bigger change. Local change, absolutely, but bigger change. And so the Liberal Democrats have pledged £1 billion a year for the next 10 years to tackle the climate emergency, creating green jobs, investing in natural flood solutions, changing our agricultural practices. We are not only an internationalist party, but a local party. And I think one solution to the climate emergency is to make life work better at a local scale. That's why I've been defending the closures of rural schools in Powys. And it's why I'd like to see stronger neighbourhoods, local food networks. But I do think we can all do this together. We're in favour of people's assemblies. We're in favour of this Community Empowerment Act. To come up with the answers together. Local people often have better ideas about how money should be spent than national government. So I'd like to work with you all to make these changes happen and to make life work better for everybody, particularly the least advantaged among us.
Thank you, Alison. And can I thank everybody who's participated tonight, particularly for the ethos that has imbued the discussions. And the effort you've put in. I know the effort is not finished yet. Some way to go yet. And it's very good that you've come to us all, not just the candidates, but all participants on a Friday evening. So that does bring this session to a close. I think maybe the Zoom will be kept open for a short while, but I need to go before I get locked into the office. So, nostalgia gyd. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you.
Diolch i ti.
Can I say thank you very, very much to Andy for being the host this evening. That's really, really kind of him. And yeah, it's been a very good evening. I'd like to thank you all. And thank you, Bria, for doing the housekeeping part. And the candidates for your words. Yeah, I'm very confused. Who do I vote for? And I'm sure we all are. We'll have to read your leaflets. And the participants, thank you so much for contributing to the questions, and hope you enjoyed your bit of a mini People's Assembly. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
I can't even wish you a safe flight. Thank you. Bye now.